Yes, you can record it, but let's not post it right away.
Not stream it?
Let's not stream it. Record it, and then maybe we... I don't know. Yeah, don't stream it. But record it, but don't stream it. Is that okay? And then we can put it up if we want. But maybe we can put it up, but...
It's nobody will watch it now because nobody will watch it. I'll make it private.
Okay.
I
would be great. That would be great. No. I think so. Neko? Not on. Hello? Hello? No. Well, we'll have to project. That's not working? It's not working, no. Hello? Hello?
Being here, and I want to thank Janice and Liz for putting this wonderful celebratory evening together for us. I've been asked to introduce Rabbi Resnick. Do we need an introduction? So let's just reflect a little bit on what we do know about the author of Next Stop. I remember the first sermon that I heard Rabbi Resnick deliver after the long winter of the pandemic. He described walking to shul on one of his first days, Shabbatot, at Pelham. And what he spoke about was the flowers that he passed on the way to shul. He described them. He talked of their aroma and their beauty with the kind of lyricism that belongs to a wordsmith. And I knew then that our new rabbi was also a writer, which was fitting for a synagogue that loves literature and loves writing. We also knew on that day, as we listened to him discuss the flora, and although we may not remember the drush, we knew then that we could always expect the unexpected from the exceptional spiritual leader who had come to us at Pelham. And indeed, that unexpected has continued through the happy years of his tenure here. We know him as a passionate and compassionate spiritual leader, passionate in his Zionism, his great and enduring love for the land of Israel, and passionate about Judaism and the literature of Judaism, to which he has now contributed. and compassionate for all in the congregation, very young, very old. He recently returned from Israel, and on the very day of his return, I visited a bereaved, beloved member of our community. He had just gotten off the plane, and guess what? He was at the home comforting the bereaved daughter of a venerated old man. Compassion and passion. We have also learned that each Shabbat we can expect a well-researched, very turgid and impressive drash on the Torah portion. We are introduced to 13th century commentators, to Talmudists we have never heard of. And as we are immersed in this very eclectic learning, suddenly an absurd thought comes to our rabbi, and he tells a joke. And we laugh in the middle of learning. We are laughing because this is what Rabbi Resnick has come to mean to us. His role here has been teacher, friend, and his book is also a book of teaching and friendship. It is a serious book written at perhaps the most serious time in the history of Jewish people in my lifetime. A time when the danger to Israel is truly existential. And his novel, Next Stop, that has been called dystopian. I don't think it's dystopian. I think it's existential and terribly important. And in its complexity, there is also, it talks about an Israel that may disappear, the nightmare of our times. But suddenly, just as his absurd bursts of humor on the beamer, on these pages, we are introduced to a grandfather who bakes lemon cakes. We are introduced to a jar of pickles that never ends. You know, like stone soup, this is pickles, a Jewish symbol of endurance and fun and humor. So his book is called Next Stop. We hope that it will not be the last stop, that we are at the beginning. We at Pelham are blessed to be at the beginning of Rabbi Resnick's literary career, which we will help to enforce and nurture and encourage, just as he has helped and encouraged all of us in so many ways. Now, Stephen Handelman, where are you, Stephen? Stephen Handelman, who is himself a writer of 4 books, and writing is the lonely voice. So we are always happy, Stephen and myself, and Rabbi Resnick and Ephraim Siegel, and whatever other writers are here today. We who work in solitude and in what we often is loneliness are very happy to be able here to share our voices, hear our voices with you tonight. So thank you for coming.
Wow, what can I say after that? I can't think of anyone who does this event more honor and glory. It's really special Muslim to her. So my role tonight is really to start a conversation going with the rabbi, who for the purposes of this night we will call Ben. And before we start that, what I'd like to do, the rabbi would like to do, is actually read a bit from the book. I don't know how many of you have read it. Those of you who haven't, I really recommend it. It's a profoundly interesting, disturbing work that you will really enjoy. So, Ben?
Thank you. Wow, that's humbling. Thank you for it. So one of the airy open plan offices that were common in their city at that time. Ethan had worked there longer, and he liked the office, which was on the 26th floor of a tall building. It was full of plants and full of light, and there was a balcony on the eastern side with a rock garden and benches, and he would often sit outside, even in the fall and early spring, and this reminded him of his childhood during the pandemic. He remembered windows, high places, the cold. During those years, they lived in a very tall building in a different city. They were meant to live in that apartment for only 6 months while his parents looked for a house, but that was not what happened. Life was predictable and orderly until it was not. And in the end, they lived there almost 3 years, from when he was 6 until he was 8. He learned to read. His parents argued and reconciled endlessly. His great-grandmother, whom he did not remember, died. The schools did not reopen for more than a year in that city, and he cycled through many different fixations during that time. Dinosaurs, self-portraits, Rube Goldberg machines, unboxing videos, Zoom karate, Cosmic Kids yoga, Minecraft, making slime. One of the most durable was folding paper airplanes with his father and then throwing them from their balcony and watching them fly out over the lake. They went through reams of paper, and the airplanes were scattered everywhere, which bothered his mother, and for a while every day she would insist that they gather them into a pile into one corner of the room. And then, without warning, she gave up, and the planes, the ones that did not make the one-way trip over the water, came to rest where they would. Later, when he would visit his parents as an adult, he would often walk by the old building. And once, several years before he met Ella, he knocked on the door of their apartment 22E and asked the couple living there if he could look around. They seemed much older to Ethan, though really they were not, and the wife was pregnant. At first they regarded him with some suspicion, but Ethan was charming, soft-spoken, and he seemed harmless and a little lost, like a child. I spent the pandemic here, he said, and the husband looked at his wife and then said, would you like to come in? They spent half an hour together. They made coffee, and Ethan asked for a few sheets of paper, and he showed them how to fold a few airplane models. But none of them flew as far as he remembered. Ethan had never thrown an airplane from the balcony of the office building, even after working there for 4 years. He thought about it. He wrote for a website that covered tech trends. He did not like his job very much because his performance was tied directly to clicks, and he suspected that the other writers, 6 of them in all, were faster and funnier than he was. And often, when he could not think of anything to write about, he would go out onto the balcony to look out over the city or up into the sky, and sometimes he would think of the apartment on the 22nd floor. It was on the balcony that he first saw Ella. He was sitting on a bench in late November, looking up at the knife-like form of a peregrine falcon as it rose into the sky, when he noticed her standing near the rail on the far side. She was wearing a yellow blazer and leggings, and to Ethan she looked cold and very small. She was facing the opposite direction, so she must have assumed she was alone. He had been watching her for only a few seconds when she took a paper airplane from the pocket of her coat. After adjusting the wings quickly, she threw it out over the city. From where he was sitting, he was unable to see its flight. When she turned, he saw her face, pale and sharp like the airplane. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "I've always wanted to do that. Why haven't you?" "I guess I'm worried it might land on a car and cause an accident." "You should worry less," she said. And she blew air into her cupped hands and went back inside. And that's where they meet. That's where our heroes meet. And then I'm going to read one more short section. This is a little bit later in the book, and this doesn't give too much away, but when things are starting to get bad. And the book is about an anti-Semitic hysteria in an unnamed American city, and you didn't know that yet, and things start to get bad. And at one point, when things are sort of precipice. Ethan makes the decision. They're up at Ella's apartment with Ella and her young son, not Ethan's son, Ella and her young son, and Ethan's making the decision whether or not he's going to go back to his apartment to gather some things, which is somewhat dangerous. They spent the rest of that morning and early afternoon at home, playing board games and folding airplanes and refreshing their news feeds. Ella spoke to her father around midday, and they decided that he should come up and stay with them, at least until the initial spasm of unrest subsided. Checkpoints had sprung up overnight like moonflowers. They bloomed darkly on satellite maps. They grew like lesions on highways and bridges. The subways were running, but not reliably. The harbors were blocked by Coast Guard vessels. The skies remained empty apart from drones, which hovered over the river like prehistoric insects. Ella said that if Joel was going to go uptown, he should make the trip soon, that he should not wait even another hour. Joel said that he would bring the gold. Throughout the day, Ella called over to the hospital to inquire about her mother, but no one answered. At the funeral home, there was an answer, but they could not give her any information about when or if they would be able to pick up her body. There was rioting in that part of the city, and there were reports suggesting that some of the rioters made it into the Jewish group, either by chance or because that's where they were going. Ethan left at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Michael, who's Ella's young son, who's about 8 years old, cried when he said that he was going. And as Ethan was tying his shoes, Ella also said that maybe he would just stay after all. I should at least go back to get clothes, he said. I'll be quick, I promise. I bet I'll make it back before your dad gets here, and then we'll figure everything out. As Ethan got ready to leave, Michael sulked quietly near the door. His hair, soft and dark, fell across his forehead, and his eyes, which were pale blue, were teary. He asked Ethan if he was really coming back, or if he was leaving for good. I'm coming back, he said. I promise. I'm just going home to get some clothes and my computer, and I can bring back some treats. There's a great bakery near my apartment. How about some really good cookies? I don't want cookies. Okay, no cookies. Will you bring Lucy? That's Ethan's dog. Ethan, still kneeling, looked up at Ella. He had not thought about the dog once over the past day and a half. It might be hard to bring her here, he said. She'll be safe at my apartment. Michael considered this. What if you get lost somehow, he asked. Here, Ethan said, picking up the plane that they had flown down the hall earlier in the day. You throw this from the balcony, and wherever I am, it will find me. Really? I don't think that's real. He smiled. Try to believe it. But how do I know you'll be back? Michael said, almost crying again. I'm telling you I will. I wouldn't lie to you, Michael. There's nothing I won't do to get back here tonight so that we can all play another game of Truths and Letters. You promise? I promise. You'll really do anything? Anything. Suddenly, Michael's eyes were clear and his voice was steady. So if you aren't back, that means you're dead. Ethan and Ella shared a quick glance. He tried to hold her there, but she looked away. Yes, Michael, he said, that's right. If I'm not back, that means I'm dead.
One of the things that we should mention, that if it's not immediately obvious, is that this book is really beautifully written, too. So you can catch that from Ben's reading of it. So what I'd like to do is, in the time we have, is have a little conversation about the book, about its meaning, its implications, and then throw it open to you guys, even those of you who haven't read the book. Hopefully you'll have some questions about what we talk about, because we're going to range far and wide, I think, about some of the basic themes of the book. But let me, every writer, when they sit down to begin thinking about a book, their aim is to create a landscape, a whole world. And the trick of a good book, of a book that catches you, is that the landscape is consistent, that it sustains from the beginning to the end. That you recognize, even if it's a weird landscape, to coin a phrase, it's still something that stays from the opening chapter, the opening words, to the end, and becomes believable. And the landscape that's created here is really interesting. I mean, Gloria mentioned that some people call this a dystopian book. Others, she said, well, maybe it's existential. It's kind of a different genre that one might call Jewish science fiction, which I've never heard of before, but there's a start there. I'm not sure if we should get too much into what it's called, but I wanted to start maybe by asking Ben about what were the seeds that got him to start thinking about this world and how it happened that it turned into this book, The Next Stop.
I joked in one of the first events that I did about the book. This was like a pre-fall showcase for the publisher, and they asked me about a tagline for the book. And I said it was like Bernard Malamud meets The Walking Dead. Which,
All right.
I also said it was like The Walking Dead meets Seinfeld. I forgot which one I used, but I've said both.
Either, yeah.
I think I started thinking about the book, and it's true. Those are both of those things that I mentioned. Both Bernard Malamud and The Walking Dead have been, I think, profound influences. I mean, The Walking Dead. Bernard Malamud is one of the greatest Jewish writers in the middle part of the 20th century, and The Walking Dead is a zombie show. Okay, and I like both, and both of them, I suppose, were an inspiration when I was writing this book. I think the book grew out of, I started writing the book at the tail end of the pandemic. I started writing the book right around the time I came to PJC. So the pandemic was sort of almost...
So we're responsible.
So the book, I think one of the major themes in the book is about disruptions, and this idea that sort of the veneer of our daily lives is really very, very thin, even though we like to imagine that it's not. It's really very, very thin. And I think a lot of that sense of disruption and displacement grew out of my experience of the pandemic. I think that one of the strange and disquieting aspects of the book is that it appeared in the world in the context of October 7th. It was submitted to my editor like a week before October 7th, and it was almost like, it's almost like, you know, a book crossed someone's desk on September 2nd about the fall of the Two Towers, right? It was a strange thing. So the book, I think, inexorably exists in the shadow of October 7th, and consequently, people who don't know how books come together will think, oh, it was written in the context of that, but no, it was written, you know, 3 years earlier about sort of an entirely different sense of displacement. And so I think that's sort of what got me thinking about it. But I also think, you know, I'll also share that in one of my first conversations about the book with my agent, she asked me a great question for which I was, I think, embarrassingly unprepared. It shocked me, the question, and it absolutely shouldn't have shocked me because it's an obvious question. She asked me the question, how much of this do you think is real? Like, okay, you're an American Jew living in a named American city, which is New York, and how much of this is like what you're actually afraid of, right? Or do you actually think this is what's, and I was comically unprepared for this question. And I think I said something like, well, I think it's a real Jewish fear, it's an aspect of Jewish experience, it's a kind of a nightmare. But I think I don't know if I was not willing to admit or not entirely conscious of the ways in which I think some of what's in Next Stop is very real. I mean, for those of you who've read the book, things get very, very bad relatively quickly. And if you leaned on me and says, well, Ben, do you really think that's where we are? I would say no. If I thought that's where we are, I wouldn't be sitting here. I mean, I've got kids, I've got like responsibilities. I'm telling all of you, finally, that's what I would be saying. That's what I would be saying. I would. But I think that a lot of what happens in the book is sort of very structural and a cyclical part of Jewish experience. And, you know, we say, now, V'hisham dalavotenu v'lanu, this is what's promised to our ancestors and to us. Shelo echad bilvad amad aleinu lechalotenu, that not only one came to destroy us, ela shem chol dor v'dor odim aleinu lechalotenu. Rather, in every generation they came to destroy us. V'hakadosh baruch hu yatzilenu miyadam, and God saved us from their hand, however we understand that. And then on many levels, the book boils down to kind of a retelling of that very basic aspect of the Jewish story, which is not the only aspect of the Jewish story, right? But one that I think is very present.
There are bright points, but the feeling of displacement, which you mentioned, I mean, really, that comes across in the book. I mean, and the sense of dread that we all face this. That especially as the year since October 7th gets more and more convoluted, more and uglier. As a Jew, you have to feel that what you write about may not be real now, but it's always the possibility that it could be real. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, do you feel that same sense of dread, even though what you're writing about is in some ways fantasy or taking some things to its logical extreme that may not happen? But the things you talk about, I mean, in this book you could find things like the Pelham, harking us back to ancient Jewish tropes, the dread of the Holocaust, living in an area where you need the checkpoints to get out.
Yeah.
These are scary elements.
My view, I think the question you're really asking, or I hope this answers the question you're really answering. My view of anti-Semitism is basically that it's like a monster that lives in the closet or under the bed, and it travels with us everywhere. And sometimes it sleeps, and sometimes it hibernates, but then it wakes up. And when it wakes up, as all monsters eventually do, it wakes up and it's hungry. That's my basic view, I think, of that is my basic view of anti-Semitism. I think it's my basic view of Jewish history, which is not to say, I want to be very clear, my view of Jewish history, and this term is from a very important 20th century German Jewish American historian named Salo Baron, who coined the phrase the lachrymose conception of Jewish history. Lachrymose meaning tear-drenched. And he argued actually forcefully against the notion that Jewish history has always been tear-soaked. He said this is a 19th and 20th century fantasy that was created for various kinds of ideological purposes. That's Salo Baron's view. That Jewish history has not always been lachrymose. I don't know that I agree with Salo Baron. I'm also not an expert on his thought, but I would emphasize that I don't think Jewish history is only lachrymose. So when I say that I think anti-Semitism is a monster that we schlep along with us everywhere we go, I mean, I think that that's true. But I don't think that that exhausts the Jewish story. And I think that the Jewish story is tear-drenched at times, but it's also profoundly joyful at times and fundamentally resilient. The book imagines a world in which Israel doesn't exist. Part of the reason for that, by the way, in addition to being thematic, and this is, I'll reveal, this is like a little bit how the sausage was made, but there's a mechanical plot reason why that's the case. Israel has to be off the map, because otherwise everyone would be reading the book saying, why don't they just go to Israel? Which is why Israel is so important, Duff. But in terms of Jewish history, I don't know if there are going to be Israelis in 500 years. I hope that there will be. I don't know if there's going to be Americans in 500 years. I have less of a dog in that fight, but I suppose if there are, that's fine. I'm 100% sure there will be Jews. I believe it with perfect faith that in 500 years, 1,000 years, there may be Israelis, there may be Americans, but there's definitely going to be Jews. I believe with perfect faith.
So there are three characters that you have, three main characters in your book: Ethan, Ella,
Yes.
and Ella's son Michael.
Yeah, those
Talk about them. I mean, Ella and Ethan end up really not in a good place. I mean, they're the ones who sort of brought Michael's in the promised land, and Michael is the one who succeeds, in a
Yes.
sense. He's the feature. Talk to us a little bit
So I won't
about
give away too much about the ending, but I'll say that, so one aspect of the book, and horrible things happen in the book, and I believe, sort of as a writer, that when you're writing about something horrible, it should seem horrible. It sounds like a tautology, but when you're writing about bad things happening to children, and bad things do happen to children in the book, it should feel horrible. Also, and I've been one among the most gratifying, actually, responses that I've gotten to the book since it came out, is that you give someone a summary of the book, and they think, well, gosh, it's going to be this horrific slog, this really grim, unrelenting slog. And actually, I don't think that the book reads that way.
No.
And I think, and a lot of responses is just, well, but it's so warm, and there's, and which is really, really gratifying, sort of as a writer. And I think a big part of that is that it's basically, on many levels, it's basically a domestic story about sort of a blended family. Ella has a child before she meets Ethan. She's not married, and they meet, and under somewhat challenging circumstances, but fall in love and make a family. And much of the story is sort of a domestic story about very trying times. And that too, I suppose, not that the whole book is really, it's not, the whole book is really not sort of a metaphor or extended exploration of my experience during the pandemic, which, by the way, I had a great pandemic. by all standards, I had a phenomenal pandemic. Even a phenomenal pandemic is a shitty pandemic, right? But that was a domestic story. I mean, of a family, in my case, sort of trapped in a pretty small apartment, like trying to figure out like what we were going to do. And there were moments of levity there. And, there's so I think that the three main characters, I love them, and I don't like seeing them suffer. And I think that a big part of the consolation in the book is that it explores
Michael goes on.
their love for one another. Well, maybe. Yeah, no spoilers.
I'm not spoiling it.
But I mean, so it's a domestic story, and I think that the consoling portrayal, I hope, of domesticity doesn't blunt some of the horror. I mean, hopefully it makes the horror more intense because it shows the stakes. But it doesn't read like, I hope it doesn't read like a grim, endless slog, which The Walking Dead does.
Who is the author
What's that?
in this? Where are you?
Where
Which
am I?
character? Yeah.
Well, as in a dream, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Gloria, but I've always felt that, like in a dream, your analyst will tell you if you lived in an era when you could have an analyst. All your characters in your dream are you, right? Because it's all a novel in many ways. A novelist who I really admire and who was a big inspiration for this book is a Pakistani British novelist named Mohsin Hamid, and he talks Mohsin Hamid. Exit West. And he, if you liked Exit West, please check out Next Stop. And he said that he was quoted somewhere as saying that a novel is in many ways, a solitary man or woman's conversation with his or her divided self.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all the characters in the book are probably me, because I made them up.
Well, yes.
And I don't mean that to be glib. I mean, on a certain level, I think that when you're reading a novel, you should know that there's an artifice to it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just these little marks on a page. These aren't real people. These are just little marks on a page that were dreamed up by one person, by the writer.
Did you have an audience in mind for this? Did you think of
Yeah,
Jews?
Jews. I wrote this book for Jews. I think it's wonderful if non-Jews read it, but I wrote this book for us, 100%. And which is why, and I mean this very, very sincerely. I fairly recently learned that the book is going to be coming out in Hebrew. It's going to be in my opinion, and I mean this in all sincerity, that is by far the more important version of the book. Why? Well, because I wrote it for the Jews, and I wanted to exist for the Jews in posterity. Again, it may be that Jews are going to be speaking English in 1,000 years. I tend to doubt it. I also tend to doubt that anyone's going to be reading my book in 1,000 years. I think it's highly, highly unlikely.
Maybe 100 years.
100 years, maybe, I don't know, maybe 100, but not 1,000, okay? By the way, Cynthia Ozick, one of the greatest living Jewish novelists, said that no writer of any seriousness strives to be mediocre. Which is true. You should know that about writers. All of us think that we're going to enter the canon. No one sets out and says, well, I want to read a book that will be read for a couple of years. No one starts out. I don't think it's going to be read in 1,000 years. If it's read in 1,000 years, I have almost perfect faith that it will only be read in 1,000 years in Hebrew, because it'll survive in some Geniza somewhere, and some Jew will pick it up and say, oh, this is an example of what one of the ancients wrote in this weird period. And it will exist in Hebrew, or it will exist not at all. Which is also, by the way, there is a line of untranslated Hebrew in this book. And it is a point of great, that I wrote, and it is, well, I'm very happy it's there. I sort of can't believe that flew, but it did. And so,
Read it.
Okay, I'll read it. It is in Hebrew letters, untranslated, unvocalized Hebrew letters. And I will tell you what I intended by that in a second. Okay, the line is, Kan gara mishpacha yehudit smecha ben hatachana hakodemet latachana haba.
Yes.
Which translates to, here lived a happy Jewish family between the last stop and the next stop.
Perfect. Which brings me to a question about how much of your rabbinical vocation informed this book?
It's a great question. It's one, every time I answer this question, I give a somewhat different answer. Because the truth is I'm still sorting it out. In many ways, a rabbi is a storyteller, of course. Storytelling is a big part of what I do at my work professionally, whether it's giving a sermon or in some other kind of context. And also, and I say this a lot, my job is basically to talk and to listen to people. And so all day long, basically, my whole job is I get to have fascinating conversations with fascinating people about all kinds of things. And it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary, blessed way to move through the world. I mean, that's what I love. It's all day long. I get paid to talk to fascinating people. That's amazing, right? And I think that experience, of course, inflects my being in the world and my sense of things, and that makes its way into my work in ways that are conscious and unconscious, I'm sure. At the same time, I think what I feel like I'm doing when I'm working on a sermon, for instance, and doing that kind of storytelling, feels to me to be a very, very different kind of endeavor from what I'm doing when I'm working on something like this. This is much slower. It's much more difficult for me. I'm not a fluent. I don't know if you've ever seen the movies. I've never written like that in my entire life. I've never.
Neither has anyone else.
Neither. I don't know. Yeah, probably neither has anybody else. It's slow. It's arduous. Writing a sermon, in part because But at least when you're working on something like this, you're striving on some level to be original, even if, there's really only Vonnegut and there's, only so many stories and whatever. But with a sermon, you're not trying to be original, actually. Originality is not, in my view, a value when you're working on a sermon. When you work on a sermon, you're trying to be an authentic instrument of the tradition and play the tradition and convey the tradition in such a way that it can be heard. And that it, pierces the ear, which is much more, at least for me, just less stressful. And
Pierces
more
the ear,
natural.
I like that.
What's that?
Pierces the ear.
Pierces the ear. Yes. Yeah. In the same way, in the same way that, a great violinist plays a piece in a certain way but the violinist didn't make it. Well, unless the violinist is also composed. But that, when you're working on a sermon, you're more, I feel, more like a musician interpreting and presenting a piece than, when I'm working on something like this, which is more.
So I want to give us, the rest of the people, a chance to ask questions and make comments, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you the last question.
Yes.
The significance of the paper airplanes. I mean, after all, they're out there in the hall, they're on the cover of the book. What do they mean? And you read about them in your first reading.
So the paper airplane, it sort of grew as a symbol as the book grew, and I think it's sort of a Jewish symbol. They're fragile, but they are also light, and they're on the wind, and they're sort of easy to make, and they're easy to sort of send on, and they're subject to currents, and sometimes they crash, and they're very beautiful, and I think the Jews are very beautiful. The paper airplane thing is like a real thing from our pandemic. Like, that is real. Like, that was one of those things that we got at one point related to in the pandemic, right? And there was a time when there were paper
Vindication
airplanes,
there.
like, all over some of those other things too, like Rube Goldberg machines, and the paper airplane is like a real, it came from a real thing. Like, it was a real, our house was covered with it. And I suppose they became a symbol of, for me in my life, I guess, disruption and trying to find a way to cope in the context of disruption.
And kind of grace.
And a kind of grace, yeah.
Okay, let's go out. Let's raise your, yes. We have some.
First of all, I want to say there are books that we are entertained by, that we like, that we love, that don't stay with us necessarily very long. You look for those things to stay with us. My question is, at times of great crisis and danger, people often turn to religion or exchange beliefs and they look for saviors.
Yeah.
And then the character of Messiah.
Yeah.
And when the first encounter had really seems like a joke, and at the end of the book is very much not a joke, not a meaningful way. Do you think there's any possibility that in the world that we're living in that this kind of person,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ephraim asked about the Messiah. There's a figure in the
Prophet.
book who's sort of a Messiah-type figure who won't give away what his deal is exactly, but yeah, he's based sort of on, and this gives a little bit away, he's based sort of on Shabtai Tzvi, who was a false Messiah in the 16th century who wreaked havoc on European Jewry. And yes, the Jews are always finding messiahs. We've been doing it for 2,000 years, and I think it's completely plausible that we would do it again. I hope when we identify the next one, we get it right. So far we're batting zero, actually, on identifying the Messiah. But yeah, from Bar Kokhba to Shabtai Tzvi to the Menachem and Rosh Neerson, to Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. I'm sure I've missed some along the way. Jews have been finding Mashiach forever.
It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, John? I recommend the book for 12 and up.
There you go.
That's a good question.
Yes.
So,
anti-immigrant hysteria in a small Ohio city.
Uh-huh.
I've been hearing so much about
Yes.
and how it has taken on a life of its own.
Yes.
And thankfully, there are people in power, like the mayor of this city and the governor of Ohio, who are trying to tamp down this hysteria.
Yes.
I always hope that there will be voices of reason to counter this hysteria which can spread like wildfire. So
Yeah.
and when you think about this and the comparisons, and I mean, was there anything in particular that you had thought about, any real life event not affecting Jews, say, that you had thought about before?
Were there real life events, that were not affecting the Jews that sort of
More
that sort of
general.
inspired the
that
book?
might have made you think about this. Like,
Um,
clearly,
I
this
mean,
would have made me.
Listen, America, I think, has historically had, among other things, sort of a deep vein of nativist kind of sentiment, which is ironic because at one point we're all immigrants in America. That's part of America's identity as well, right? I mean,
Japanese internment camp.
if you come, yeah, right, Japanese internment camps. I mean, many other examples. If you are a member of this shul, you've heard me say a million times that, from the Torah's perspective, being kind and welcoming the stranger is clearly the most important mitzvah. Because the Torah says it 36 times, which is far more than it mentions, heads and shoulders more than it mentions any other mitzvah. So, creating a kind and welcoming society for immigrants is, in my view, of all of the different sort of causes that we could think about as Jewish causes, is in my view, and we should, there are many causes that we can think about as Jewish causes authentically, ensuring that the societies in which we live, whether as a minority here in America or as a majority in Israel, ensuring that those societies are genuinely welcoming and open to the stranger is clearly part of our covenantal responsibility. And the Torah says it 36 times in black and white. And so yeah, I mean, that's very much a part of, I mean, that animates me in general. Again, the book's all me, so that was part of it.
Let me just follow up on that. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things that, the book presents us for the world, as I was saying in the beginning, what you don't say, what you don't write about is how we got there. And if you were to write a book about how we got to that point where there's now a new Pelham settlement, the cities have been destroyed, Jews are caught and stuck and facing extinction again, how did we get there, and could we have prevented it? If you were thinking about the other alternative.
I don't know how far we are from there. I mean, like the Shoah was not ancient history. I mean, sometimes we think, people alive who have memories. I mean, it's not like, it doesn't feel very far to me. Do I think that's likely to happen in America in the near future? No, I don't. Not in that way, and perhaps never again, because Israel exists. But, I mean, how do we get there?
I mean, did you have a concept of what happened in this world that led to the world that we created?
Well, in the world of the book, it's a combination of these kind of anomalous, supernatural kind of events, which are unexplained and traumatic, like objectively in the world of the story, these things are going on. And then when we really think bad things are going on, they are sort of projected onto the Jews, and that's kind of what's been a historical pattern, and that's what happens in the book. I mean, not to give too much away. Yes.
Okay, so I'm a very aggressive reader of your reviews, probably more than anyone in the whole world.
Yes.
And a critique that several people have mentioned that I think maybe would be helpful for everyone here who hasn't read the book to get some guidance from you about is that someone said, he's a rabbi, so like there's more questions than answers sometimes. And the symbolism isn't always clear.
That's
And
a
I wonder
critique.
if you can give guidance to people as they're setting out on a reading journey about how to think about
The symbolism, so when you were in, like, high school English class, at least in my, when I was in high school English class, I was taught that, when you were writing a paper, that, things were very neatly symbolic in books, and that, every time that, Hemingway mentions a fish, it symbolizes this, and when it mentions trees, this is this theme that's being explored, and maybe some writers work that way. I think some writers do work more that way than I do. I think probably most writers, at least most writers I know, do not. Which is to say that a lot of the symbols in the book, or the I don't say symbols, the themes in the book, are overdetermined. I mean, I was going to say, well, what do you mean exactly by this Messiah character? I mean a lot of things. I'm gesturing towards a lot of things. I'm gesturing towards Sabbatianism. I'm gesturing towards New Age type of gurus, I suppose, in some way. I'm gesturing towards the danger of charisma. And I think that I get that for some readers, it could be frustrating that some of the themes feel slippery. But I think Torah is like that. Torah has 70 faces, and I think stories are. A novel is not a sermon. Like, it is not a moral at the end of the novel necessarily. I hope the novel is generative, and I hope the novel is symbolic in the romantic sense of the word symbol. So there's a whole thing in sort of European romantic literature about the difference between a symbol and a metaphor. Okay? Stick with me a second, and more questions. A metaphor, once you know how the metaphor works, you can dispense with the metaphor. So if you say it's raining cats and dogs, that means it's raining really, really hard, right? And once you know what the metaphor, it's raining cats and dogs, means, you can dispense with the metaphor and just say it's raining hard and communicate the exact same content, arguably, according to like the romantic poets who like thoughts. A symbol gestures at something beyond itself, which can't fully be contained in the words. So an example of a symbol is like a flag. Right? So you could describe the flag, and it would have two stripes, and it would have Magen David, it would be blue and white, and so on and so forth. But describing this flag does not exhaust the experience of seeing the flag wave. And I think novels, or at least I hope that novels are more like that they gesture at something which is hard to articulate beyond themselves.
I think one of the charms of the book, actually, is that you plunge us right into this world. You don't explain how we got here.
Yes.
You only explain what's going on.
That's true.
So you have to rely really on symbols.
That's true. I don't like exposition. So, I mean, that's a taste thing. I don't.
And it's a technique. I mean, it's a science fiction technique, whatever, but it's a technique that
You other questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Andrew, yeah.
Maybe you stand up a little bit so we can.
I did not. I knew the characters and I knew the situation that I wanted them to be living through, and I knew some of the major beats. I specifically did not know the end. And the ending section is the section that was by kind of revisions, and I don't think I will share with everyone all of the different versions about how that went, but the answer I did not. I had a very clear sense of the characters, and I had a clear sense of the plot to a point, but I did not have a crystal clear sense always of where it was going. Other than I knew that I was unwilling to have an ending. So there's a book called The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Has anyone read The Road by Cormac McCarthy? Which is I've actually never managed to finish it because it's too much almost. And it ends, I mean, I don't know if there's supposed to be like a glimmer. I do know how it ends. I don't know if there's supposed to be like a glimmer of hope at the end, but like I'm not sure that there is. I'm not sure it's just kind of like, where it's like, okay, we're just going right down with this shit. And I was unwilling to end a book like that because I really like my characters. I don't write about people that I don't like. And I think some writers do. By the way, of course, they're writing like things about themselves they don't like. But some writers write and they punish their characters. Right? I actually don't like when bad things happen. Because I like the people that I write about, by and large. I mean, unless they're villains. So I was unwilling to have it end. I knew that it wasn't going to end, and it doesn't end, I don't think. Just I'm like, unrelentingly, the world's over. That's pack up and go home. That's not, and so I knew that I didn't want to. What's that? You can interpret it different ways, but I don't think it, yeah.
Actually, my question is very similar. You know, whether you have outlined the process you're going to basically
No.
answer that question.
No, I don't usually work from outlines, although I do write better when I have a pretty clear sense of plot momentum. But I do think a book needs plot. I'm a fan of plot.
Do you have other titles that you're considering?
Yes. Many titles. The Next Stop was one of the very last things that my agent and I settled on before sending it off. What's that? That is right. No.
No, I trust you. You're better.
Is there a question? No, you?
Yes. Yes. So I intend three things by that. There are three possible ways of experiencing that text. There may be more, but there are three possible ways I think of experiencing that text. One is as a Hebrew reader of some ability. You know, if you can read Hebrew, then you are put inside, and you have a little secret kind of experience. You're brought inside in a way that is extremely intimate. Okay, that's going to happen for any reader of Hebrew. The second experience, if you're a Jewish reader who has some familiarity with Hebrew or has some experience of holding a book that has some Hebrew in it, maybe you have a little homework project that you could go on Google and you could type it in and you could learn about it, and then also you're brought into the inside. If you have no Hebrew and you have no sense of what Hebrew is, and you're a non-Jewish reader, let's say, you are put on the outside. And all three of those potential responses were for me intended. And I think that translating it would have diluted on some level the intensity of those three potential responses, which is one, it's a warm hug. Two, it's like makes you feel like, man, I gotta work on my Hebrew. feel on some way outside. Like I actually, when I like read, like I don't read that much Jewish. Like I read sometimes I read Jewish literature and Jewish writers, but very often I actually like reading other things because I have a lot of Jews in my life. I like being taken on a journey someplace else.
There's another option. I mean, for those of us who don't know Hebrew, you can, I know someone who does. And I would show that to them and then say, please read this to me, and we can get into a conversation. That's another opening.
The book club up.
Yes.
There's,
Yeah, I've thought about that. Yeah, no, I've thought about that. It doesn't work, frankly. It's not the same, because the book, I mean, the book is written in English. I mean, and I have real anxiety as a Jewish writer about the fact that I write in English. Because I think it's very hard. Gloria and I have talked about this. I wonder about whether it's possible to tell authentically Jewish stories in a Christian language, and I believe English is a Christian language. So we are, I think, as a thinker, I think in a language that positions me as other, that I feel like my own mind is in some ways colonized. I really am anxious about this. As a non, what's that? Yes, of course. Yeah, it doesn't have to be Hebrew, but right. I mean, we as American Jews were the first diaspora, I think, since the Jews of Alexandria, who spoke Greek. Philo couldn't read Hebrew. I don't think. That doesn't have an authentically Jewish language, and I'm very concerned about this. But no, of course, it doesn't have to be Hebrew. Yiddish did just fine, as did Ladino and Aramaic and Judeo-Arabic, and
that's so interesting. What would have changed if you wrote it in Hebrew? Do you think?
I don't know. I don't think this book. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know if this book could have been written in Hebrew. I mean, it's a great question. I think. I have a friend in Jerusalem who thinks that my view of Hebrew is nuts. I was starting to do this conversation with her over the summer, and she said, Ben, you overstate the value of Hebrew. You think Hebrew is magic. And you think everything that Hebrew touches is automatically Jewish. Right? That, like those, right? And we were talking about, I forgot what we were talking about, but the example, I don't think we were talking about this, but you could use the example of, those, greased up guys and girls on the beach in Tel Aviv playing beach volleyball, and they're all tatted up and, yelling at each other in Hebrew. And my friend said, you think that that's Jewish just because you think it's magic. You think everything that Hebrew touches imbues the experience with a deep and inexorable Jewish pulse. And I said to her, yes, you're right, I do think that. I do think that. I think that Hebrew is magic. I do think that. And so the other thing about that inscription is it's based on, that was a late addition to the book. And if you go to the Jewish Museum in Lower Manhattan, there is a cup, there's like a pewter cup there, on which is written in Hebrew, on a little like note, like a little post-it note. The owner of the cup wrote in Hebrew, I think in the Warsaw Ghetto, something like, in this cup, kosher food was prepared for my daughter, Sarah, for my daughter, before she was taken away to be slaughtered. And he's not a Hebrew speaker, right? But he wrote it in Hebrew. Why? For posterity. That's because if you're going to write a Jewish inscription and engrave it on a wall, and that is where that line in the book appears. It's a character who basically writes something on a wall, a non-Hebrew speaker. You're going to do it in Hebrew.
So your next book will be in Hebrew?
No, it won't. I can't write in Hebrew. nowhere near in the realm of possibility. I do, yes, I do, but one thing that I think about a lot is how to, if it's possible, to tell a Jewish story in some version of English that could not be told in any other language. I think an example of this that has been done is Art Spiegelman's extraordinary Mouse. I think the way that he captures the Yiddish accented English voice of his father is truly extraordinary and communicates something about the Jewish experience in language which is irreducible. In other words, English does become a Jewish language in the mouth of Vladek Spiegelman in those books. I think. What's that?
He writes graphic.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
And I'm remembering a conversation that was repeated to me. Agnon, who only wrote in Hebrew, although Yiddish was his first language, he only wrote in Hebrew, and he met Philip Roth. And he said to Philip Roth, "Your writing will be destroyed. Nobody will read it."
Yeah.
And Roth said, "Why not?" He said, "Because it's not translated into Hebrew. At that point, it had not been, and very little of it has been since." So Philip said to him, "What about Saul Bellow?" And Agnon said, "Oh, who said that? I'm going to tell Wilfred. We have translated him into Hebrew." The idea is that Hebrew is an enduring language. Hebrew is brought to life. It's the miracle. It's almost as big a miracle as the state of Israel itself. It was brought to life, but it never was in desuetude because it came with us throughout the Golan, in the Chumash, in the Torah, in the Siddur.
yes.
So Hebrew is the enduring language. So if you're translated into Hebrew, then your book will live forever.
Yes.
And not to be missed, Gloria. I mean, and, you've read, and I'm a great admirer of Cynthia Ozik's essay, Toward a New Yiddish, in which she sort of tries to argue that English could be a new Jewish language.
Cynthia doesn't know Hebrew.
I think she's wrong about it. I mean, I wish she was right, but I think she's wrong. I think English is not enough, but I think that not to be minimized is that Yiddish and Judeo-Arabic and they're written also in Hebrew character. Like there's more, which is not to be minimized. I mean, I'm not such a mystic, but I think the shapes of the letters are. But okay, there's something there. Any other